Welcome to meeting number 39 of the House of Commons Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sous forme hybride.
Today's meeting is in hybrid form. The MPs will be participating in person with the Zoom application.
Wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on the Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Avant de commencer,
Before beginning, I would like to emphasize that this topic of the first part of today's meeting is the unlawful transfer of Ukrainian children to Russia. Some discussions might be difficult for people who are viewing the meeting and for the members and the staff of the subcommittee. If you feel or if you experience distress or you need help, please consult the clerk to obtain information on support that is available through the administration of the House of Commons.
join me in welcoming the first witness who is appearing this morning, Mr. Andriy Kostin, Prosecutor General of Ukraine. Mr. Kostin, welcome to Canada and welcome to this Committee of Human Rights. Thank you for agreeing to appear today. You will have a maximum of 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we will move on to questions with members of the subcommittee. I will let you know when you have 1 minute left. Mr. Kostin, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Please go.
Good morning, Chair El-Khoury and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. Thank you very much for this opportunity to appear before you today and to unmask war crimes and other atrocities that Russia is committing against Ukrainian children. We're equally glad for being given an opportunity to submit a brief paper on that matter. At the outset, I wish to convey my sincere gratefulness to Canada, its government and people for your unwavering and continuous support to Ukraine. The issue of our bilateral cooperation and partnership was widely discussed at yesterday's event in Toronto, United for Justice Conference, War Crimes Against Ukrainian Children, hosting prominent Canadian and international experts, Ministers Joly and Virani. Sadly, as we speak, Russia continues to commit the heinous acts as a distinct feature of Russian military and political doctrine and modus operandi of Russian armed forces and their proxies. Forced deportation and transfer of Ukrainian children is one of the atrocious consequences of Russia's aggression, an ill-fated practice implemented since early days of occupation of parts of Ukrainian territories, already from 2014. So what does Russia do? It forcibly displaces, completely removes and separates children from their parents, immediate family and setting in which they have initially been reared. Top political leadership of Russian Federation is mastermind of this large-scale policy implemented under the pretext of security and health concerns or for their vacation purposes. In Russia, Ukrainian children are stripped of their Ukrainian citizenship and put for adoption into Russian families via online advertised adoption websites. It's not a mere allegation, but openly publicized practice supported and even co-perpetrated by Russian officials that are supposed to protect children's rights and freedoms. The first 2 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court for President Putin and so-called Child Commissioner Lvova Belova for the forced deportation of children are testament of such practice. Imagine children, mere toddlers, who become a trumping card in the hands of Russia, not knowing or remembering their true identity, whereabouts, family, or relatives. We are talking about thousands of children being taken to Russia in a specific manner. children in occupied territories are transferred and gathered to assigned centers under the pretext of evacuation for unsubstantiated security reasons. Within days, children are moved via auto or rail transit to border regions of Russian Federation, from where they are distributed to the child care institutions in various regions of Russian Federation. Relevant Russian authorities assign a guardian from among the employees of the administration of the child care institutions in order to launch the adoption procedures along with the change of citizenship and transfer of deported children to Russian families. While placed in these centers in the occupied territories or border regions of Russia or the child care institutions in Russia, Ukrainian children have restricted freedom movement, meaning unable to leave the place, and lack of contact with family members or relatives. Another practice relates to transfer of Ukrainian children to occupied Crimea or various regions of Russian Federation in the so-called recreation camps, some as far as Siberia and East Pacific coast. Many facilities refuse to release them, citing invented so-called safety concerns. As of today, we have information about more than 19,000 Ukrainian children being forcibly transferred to temporarily occupied territories and deported to Russia, as we continue to trace and gather information about each and every child. So far, only 387 of children have been returned. Apart from the ICC, this practice has been labeled and recognized as a war crime by the United Nations Inquiry Commission for Ukraine, OSCE fact-finding mission, and regional organizations like Council of Europe. Unfortunately, the crimes against Ukrainian children are neither random nor spontaneous. They are part of Kremlin's widespread and systematic policy against Ukrainian civilian population. Therefore, in our understanding, this practice constitutes crimes against humanity and could even amount to the crime of genocide or forcible transfer of children. Russia does not stop with deportation and adoption processes. The grown-up Ukrainian children are forced to undergo so-called re-education into Russian. For teenage boys, it often includes militarization programs. Last year, a US State Department-supported program depicted a network of 43 re-education camps in the Conflict Observatory report, whereas children are indoctrinated into Kremlin's vision of nation, culture, history, and society. It is part of Russia's planned policy aimed to smear Ukrainian identity by robbing us of our children. A new 4-day-old report discloses involvement of government of Belarus, whereas over 2,400 deported Ukrainian children undergo political and military training in Dubrava and other 12 facilities in Belarus. This is not new. Since 2014, the Russification policy has been heavily implemented in occupied territories through so-called re-education programs. Imagine the grotesque sights of children dressed in military type of uniform, glorifying the war through Kremlin's distorted view of historic facts. As the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, my task is to secure full accountability for these heinous crimes on national level, while also fostering extensive use of international justice mechanisms. As the primary duty bearer, we extensively investigate international crimes against children, including the forced deportation and transfer cases. We are grateful to our partners for their unwavering support to the prosecution. We equally commend the Office of Prosecutor of the ICC for their rigorous efforts, determination, and steadfast progress in investigation. But more needs to be done by all of us. First, we need to implement effective...
D'abord, nous devons mettre en œuvre des modalités pour contrer ce genre de pratiques et tenir compte des individuels et des entités impliquées ou associées au transfert forcé et à la déportation d'enfants ukrainiens.
We have problem with traduction. Yes. We had problem with the translation. You could
It's
continue
okay.
now. Yes.
Yeah. Second, we need to secure safe and unimpeded return of Ukrainian children to their families, guardians, and homes through a meaningful and mobilized assistance. And we hope to see Canada being at forefront of this initiative as co-leader of the Point 4 of Ukraine's peace formula. Thirdly, we need to continue effective investigation and prosecution of each and every individual perpetrator, denying them any opportunity for safe havens. We're happy to see Canada standing with us, exploring such avenues in the name of Ukrainian children. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Thank you for your good and excellent comments. And now we pass to the question by the member of the committee. Every member will have 7 minutes to speak. I would like to start by inviting Mr. Guinness to speak. Mr. Guinness, you have the floor for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Prosecutor General Costin, for being with our committee today. I think you will have, and all of us will have seen the announcement. I think it was yesterday from Minister Jolie about a network on this, and I think it speaks to the important cross-party work that's been done at this committee and in general on these horrific human rights abuses that are happening in Ukraine. Of course, our primary focus today is on the issue of the abduction of children, but I did want to invite you to share with the committee about some other issues of atrocities that have been committed by Russian invaders. We've heard reports of systematic sexual violence as well, of torture being used routinely, and even minors as well being victims of sexual violence and of torture. Frankly, horrific contexts in which these have happened, family members forced to watch and things like that. I wonder if you can share an update with us on both torture and sexual violence being used by the occupying regime.
Thank you for your question. As you rightly mentioned, Russia is committing all types of existing war crimes against Ukraine and Ukrainians. And conflict-related sexual violence is one of the most brutal war crimes which is committed by Russia. And this is not an incidental case, or not cases related to a specific war military unit that, as we say, could go crazy. We saw it as a pattern on the occupied territories. We have first findings in first months of the war, and after all world saw the atrocities committed in Bucha, Irpin, and other cities near Kiev, and mass atrocities committed by Russian there. It was February and March last year. Then, after liberation of Kharkiv region in September, we saw the same crimes committed by other military units and in other months of the ongoing war and occupation. Then, after we liberated Kherson in November, we saw the same type of crimes committed there. So it means that committing crimes against civilians, including children, is a policy of persecution of Ukrainians, which is supported on the very high level of military and political leadership of Russia. We are creating this, we are investigating these chains of command. Coming back to conflict-related sexual violence, at the moment we are investigating 252 facts of sexual violence in time of war, including 151 women as victims of sexual violence, 95 men, and 13 children. We have already identified 37 suspects. We have indicted 22 of them in Ukrainian courts, in my office, and we have already 2 persons convicted by Ukrainian courts for commission of sexual violence against Ukrainian victims.
Mr. Guinness?
Thank you for sharing that very chilling information with us. I just want to follow up on the issue of the chain of command as it relates to these atrocities on the Russian side. What kind of evidence are you finding of coordination, of direction? Do you think it's a matter of the higher ups tolerating and creating a permissive environment for this abuse, or do you think there is clear direction intentionally telling Russian soldiers to commit these kinds of crimes?
Mr. Costin?
We have evidences of both. But if we look at the mapping of crimes committed on the occupied territories against civilians, we understand that, once again, it's a systematic policy of persecution. Because the crimes committed against civilians during occupation mostly were aimed to break the will of Ukrainian people and to commit these crimes and to show to the others, to threaten them and to keep them silent and to keep them like we say, to try to put them on the knees. That's why the commission of such crimes is so, I would say, systematic, and we have a diversity of crimes committed against civilian population. I can make several examples. For instance, with the survivors with whom we work in region of Bucha. During occupation, for instance, one of the cases when the father with his teenager son, they were just walking on the street to get humanitarian aid from the city council, where volunteers gathered this humanitarian aid. They were stopped by two Russian servicemen, and they were put on the ground, and they intentionally killed the father in the face of in presence of his son. They also have shots up the son who was laying, just to threaten him that they could kill. The other case, the different case in the same place, was when they enter the private building where family, wife, husband, and her father were living. Our people start to say that we don't need any liberation, just go away, leave us alone. They killed the father the man, the husband of this wife, they killed in her presence. And then they 2 times put a gun at her and initiated or imitated killing of her. And only after her father asked them to leave them alone, they escaped from this building. And they waited until Bucha was liberated by Ukrainian army in order to come back and to bury the body of her husband. Mm-hmm. And we have a big variety of such cases. I can tell a lot of them. But it's important as an evidence to point out that in one small town, they committed different types of crimes just as a matter of terrorizing local population.
Thank you, Mr. Guinness. Time is up. Now I would like to invite Mr. Al-Ihsasi. Mr. Al-Ihsasi, you have the floor for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Prosecutor General. It's a great honor to have you here. Thank you for being with us. I've had the opportunity over the course of the past year and a half to be in Ukraine twice, and I've always made an effort to meet with your officials who, in my opinion, are doing a magnificent job gathering evidence, cataloging that evidence, and building cases against the Russian troops who are in Ukraine. I was wondering if you could first tell us, at a very macro level, all of the significant work that your office is doing, cataloging the criminal activities of Russians in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. Of course, to investigate 110,000 war crimes, this is the figure which we fixed at the moment. And we all understand that the real number is much higher because we have no access to the temporary occupied territories. And so coming back to investigate such great number of war crimes needs to organize our work in proper manner. For that, we have created a special unit, which is War Crimes Department on central level. We have trained all of our prosecutors and investigators from 2 investigative authorities, which are National Police and State Security Service. We also created specialization in specific war crimes, like conflict-related sexual violence unit, like a special unit which investigate war crimes against children, special unit which investigate war crimes against environment, special unit which investigate war crimes against cyber attacks which are committed by Russia as war crimes, which is quite unique in investigation and prosecution of such type of crimes. I also created special units, war crimes prosecutors in 9 regions, which are close to the front line and which in regions which were affected by the temporary occupation. We are passed through substantial training of all prosecutors and investigators in these regions. We also created a strategic documents. The most important is strategy of investigation and prosecution of international crimes for 2023 and 2025, which gives us an opportunity to legally and structurally to categorize war crimes which we are investigating and prosecuting, and to prioritize, because it is impossible to do everything at one moment. So now we have a specific document which is a signal for all prosecutors and investigators how we prioritize cases. Of course, cases where civilians were killed, cases where civilians were wounded, raped, ill-treated, humiliated, when they were illegally detained, and of course all cases where children are affected as victims and survivors are our priority. And in order to mitigate the issues of the workload, we also transfer some cases from these regions to the other regions of Ukraine because they have more possibilities. In addition to work with all war crimes and in addition to these special units, we have also two groups of prosecutors who investigate the crime of aggression, the leadership crime, which preceded commission of all other war crimes, and crime of genocide. So this is more our mapping on our national level. The other layer of our, as we name it, web of accountability is our work with the international judicial mechanisms. First and foremost, it's our cooperation with the ICC and team of Karim Khan. You know that the ICC have launched, not only opened, but really launched their field office in Kyiv, the biggest field office of the ICC outside The Hague in their history. So it's about sustainability of our cooperation with the ICC. Our prosecutors are working on a daily basis with the ICC. We created task forces. We also have priorities in our investigations. I cannot give you details because for the sake of independence of the investigation, but our work is very structured with the ICC. We also work with all existing international mechanisms like UN Inquiry Commission, OSCE fact-finding missions, all other UN mechanisms on preventing torture, on combating sexual violence, and we have great support. The biggest issue is our full transparency. So we are ready to cooperate. We are ready to share all evidences and information, and this is a very strong position of our government, to be open to share every existing information. Third layer is our cooperation with our international partners. There are more than 20 countries who opened their national investigation with regard to war crimes committed in Ukraine, including Canada. We have created a joint investigation team with countries which are close to Ukraine and where a lot of refugees are located, because these refugees can deliver evidence statements, evidences, photo, video footage, and other evidences of war crimes they have been victims or witnesses of. Our joint investigation team comprises of Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Slovakia, and Romania. And it simplifies exchange of evidences. We also, as I mentioned, coordinate efforts of independent investigation of the other countries. And for that, on the level of the Eurojust in The Hague, we have created a specific unique instrument which is fully operational from November. It's called CSED database. It's Core International Crimes Evidence Database. Why we did it together with the help of Euro Commission? Because witness or victims, they are located, millions of Ukrainians are located in different countries, and they can approach police and prosecutors in these countries and give statements, give evidences. And in order for these evidences not to be lost as one piece of big case, we created this database where national investigative authorities of the other countries can include information about the evidences. And we have an agreement between all of us that we will exchange these evidences in a very speedy manner. We are also we are expecting first indictments to Russian perpetrators from other jurisdictions. And this will be a very important signal to Russians that there will be no safe haven, because national investigations are ongoing and we are sharing information from our side with the other national investigative authorities. I'm ready also to transfer cases from Ukraine where, for instance, nationals of the other countries were affected by the aggressive war of Russia. To transfer cases, it will help us, of course, a little bit reduce our workload. But once again, it will be a very important signal that the world is standing with us in order to pursue justice for all victims and survivors of this war. And of course, The last element of our accountability web is creation of special tribunal for the crime of aggression. We are grateful for Canada for both to support the core group of countries who are now preparing legal modality of such tribunal, as well as your support to the ICC, which is very important. And I always say, helping ICC, you are helping Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Hassasi. Sorry, the time is up. Maintenant, j'invite Monsieur.
I would like to invite Mr. Alexis Brunel-Duceppe. You have the floor for 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And welcome to the Prosecutor General. In your knowledge, do you know if there are independent organizations that have access to these children to see what's happening when they are transferred to Russia?
Est-ce que vous pourriez, s'il vous plaît, répéter?
Are there organizations, independent organizations, that can verify what is happening to the children once they are transferred to Russia? Is there access to those children when they're in Russian soil?
A big problem because Russia does not cooperate with international organizations and international mechanisms, even being part of these international organizations and mechanisms. So I always say that Russia use any possibility to use in its favor all existing international mechanisms like the veto right in Security Council of UN, but Russia does not cooperate with the other institutions in accordance with international law where Russia is part of and where Russia has specific obligations. We use different avenues how to try to verify this information. One of the avenues is International Committee on the Red Cross. This is difficult work, and they have part of, I would say, if not access, but part of communication, partial communication with Russian authorities, and from time to time Russia can verify some information, while we are not sure that this information, if verified by Russia, that it is actual. Because coming back to children and the detention centers and so-called camps where they are located, Russia is moving these children from time to time between different camps, and even if they give this information could be not valid. But in general, Russia does not cooperate with international mechanisms and institutions, which really create a problem. For this purpose, we cooperate with different NGOs and civil society organizations who are both national and international, I mean national Ukrainian, because they used OSINT resources in order to try to find out where our children are located. And if we have this information, then of course we raise the awareness on the world level, and then in some cases Russia starts to return our children back home.
Merci. C'était exactement.
Thank you. That's why I was asking you that question, because it's quite significant. But you talked in your introduction to the change in behavior of those children when they come back to their families. We have children who came to testify, some very courageous children have testified to the committee. How, to what degree is it systematic, this change in behavior of children who were transferred to Russia and then come back to their families?
This is a sensitive issue, and I think I cannot give you the full picture of all children who were returned back home. We are treating very sensitively with them, and for the matter of justice, we also enhanced our communication with children. We changed our approaches and techniques, and usually we are limited to one interrogation or one communication with children because we can't re-traumatize them. Mm-hmm. It happened that it could be 2 times, but usually we instruct our investigators and prosecutors to limit to one investigation, and we have special green rooms, which called the Barnahus, where children, especially very young, they are communicating with psychologists. And the prosecutor is in another room supervising this, and so they are not meeting even with prosecutor. But our legislation, which is improved, let it possible, and this is used by. So I mean that as prosecutor general, we don't try to go into such deep details in each and every case. I mean, to find out how the perception of Ukrainian children who returned back home has been changed. So if child is ready to tell this, we accept this information, but we can't somehow it's impossible to press and to try to ask. So it's mostly what children are ready to tell us. This we fix, and this is very important because changing of this approach, we took standards of the International Criminal Court to apply in our work with children, and these standards are very high. While if you allow, I will finish. It's very important for children to take their part in pursuing justice, to be at the table, and if they are ready, their voice as victims and witnesses of war crimes is extremely important. So we engage them to speak, and we use specific techniques for them to speak freely. And this is very important, that children will be all the time at the table of justice with all other institutions, for their voice to be heard.
Merci. À quel point
Thank you. To what degree do you have evidence to know whether the Wagner Group was involved with the transfer of those children? The Wagner Group.
We need to check additionally this information, because Wagner Group is mainly committing two types of illegal activities. So one is the part which fight as a part of Russian armed forces, and second, they were among those who were most brutal in terrorizing civilian population. We can check this information for the purpose to give you exact answer and provide you with written statement if you wish.
Est-ce que j'ai encore du temps?
Yes. Do I still have time?
Plusieurs.
Sorry. There are quite a few people high up in the pyramid who are involved in transfers, but there are also public servants at the federal, regional, local level that have not been sanctioned by the U.S., by other people. Would it be important to make these sanctions uniform at the level of the local level? Would that make a difference in our fight against the transfer of children to Russia?
And we are very supportive of using of this instrument. While we are collecting evidences to be enough to indict them, during this moment we share this information to sanction them, because sanctioning them on the medium level, it should deter the others to commit this crime. Because what Russians did, if they adopted specific legislation, and many of these people think that they're just executing the order, while they don't understand that they're committing war crime, and sanctioning them, making their life more difficult for commission of this crime prior to the enough evidences that we can indict them for criminal case. I think it's very important to deter commission of such crimes in the future. Thank you.
Merci.
And now I would like to invite Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, you have the floor for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much, Prosecutor General Costin, for being here. This is a very, very difficult conversation. We have seen a pattern of war crimes committed by Russia, the targeting of Ukrainian cultural symbols, mass sexual violence in the battlefield areas like Kharkiv and Kherson. We have seen torture. We've seen the murder of civilians. But this question of the forcible taking of children moves us into a whole other realm, because it is about the destroying of families, the destroying of identity. One of the legal definitions of genocide is the forcible taking of children. So just to have it on the record here for the Canadian people, you've identified 19,000 forcible deportations. You've identified children who are being put up for adoption illegally. You've stated that teenagers are being forced into military training. How systemic is this, and what is this pattern telling us about Russia's attempt to destroy Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian families?
This is a pattern used by Russia in order to destroy Ukraine as a nation, because kidnapping our children in such a massive scale is an attempt to steal our future, the future of our nation. And the first arrest warrant, as we mentioned already, and Putin to be at the top of this systematic practice is explicit evidence that this is a part of Russian genocidal policy against Ukraine and Ukrainians. You absolutely rightly mentioned that first transfer of children from one group to another is in itself a part of crime of genocide. We also have witnessed not only this element of genocide, but also another one, the incitement to commit genocide. We have already 2 convictions in Ukrainian courts against Russian propagandists, including one who publicly called on killing of Ukrainian children, sinking them in the river. So with this, the other propagandist, Gasparyan, who is now also convicted by Ukrainian court, he is the author of so-called term denazification, which they used against us. And he is one of the leaders of this incitement to genocidal policy. And of course, when this is a systematic from incitement to commission of the element of genocide, it's explicit evidence that the genocidal intent of Russian Federation to erase, to eliminate Ukrainians as a nation is in fact present.
Thank you for that. I have a 2-part question. One is, in order to deal with international war crimes, it's important to be able to name and identify. So we've identified, obviously, Vladimir Putin is a major war criminal, and Madame Lvova-Belova, the so-called children's minister. How much work has been done to identify the enablers, the functionaries, the low-level people who are engaged in the forcible taking of children, who have obligation to protect those children? Are we able to start naming them and issuing warrants on the international in the international arena? As well, the 19,000 forcibly deported children, do we have good records on where we think they may be, who they are, their families? What is the connection in terms of the importance of having that information?
Mr. Costin?
This is extremely important information in order to make possible to prosecute and to punish everyone who is involved in this commission of this crime. And second, to have information where our children are in order to return them back home. Because accountability in itself is not enough to return our children back home. It's an important element of, I would say, pressure over Russian authorities to start to return our children, but it's not enough. That's why we are calling on creation of international mechanism how to return back our children, where Canada is one of the leaders together with Ukraine, uniting the other nations who are ready to help us. Coming back to your first question, of course we have investigations, as I already mentioned, where we know those who are involved in commission of this crime, I mean abduction of our children on higher and medium level and regional level. And once we have this information, we immediately share to us to sanction them, as I mentioned, while we are continuing our investigation. So for the names which we identified, we're sharing this information in order to sanction them prior to indict. On international level, of course, we are going on with helping the ICC to investigate this case wider and broader, and I hope we will all see results of this investigation in future.
Thank you. I want to go to a more sensitive area in terms of the support for the families. Canada has its own dark history of forcibly taking children in the Indigenous communities and children that were taken as a government policy. And I represent many families who've gone through that, and the trauma is multi-generational. Mm-hmm. We're still picking up the pieces for policies that were enacted 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I know we're talking about children who are at risk now, but what are the supports in place for the families? Do you have the resources necessary, given the fact that with the war and everything else, to support the families? Because this is going to have long-term implications to protect families and protect those children.
Thank you very much for this question. You really raised a sensitive issue, since our policy on the governmental level is to ensure support to all victims and survivors of this war. While the large number of victims and survivors of this war, and definitely the relatives, the parents of kids who were kidnapped, are already victims of this war. At the moment, waging this war, which was unprovoked and unjustified, we lived in our country peacefully. We were attacked by Russia. Part of our economy, substantial part of our economy and industry is destroyed by Russia. And in order to run the country and to ensure that all victims of this war have properly social security and support from the government, we need such support on long-standing basis from our friends and allies. And helping Ukrainians who are now affected for this war, it's not just helping our government to run the country in time of war. It's not only helping us to close the deficit of our budget. It's completely humanitarian in nature, because these people can receive social security payments and protection only with the help of international community who stand with Ukraine.
So Canada can help on that?
Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Angus. Sorry, time is out. And now, because we are restricted in time, every member will have 2 minutes and a half. Okay? I would like to invite Madame Vandenben. You have the floor for 2 minutes and a half, please.
I was going to share my time, but I'm not sure that we'll have time in 2 minutes. But I did want to start by telling you and all those that are with you, Canada is absolutely behind you, and the work that you are doing is going to go such a long way into making sure there is no impunity, which is so vitally important in order to really have a peace with justice when this is over. So thank you for what you're doing. I noted, though, that my concern is that you mentioned, for instance, that there's a pretext that Russia is saying this is for evacuation, that this is for the children's protection. And, these are arguments that they would continue to make, particularly in tribunals and courts. How can you document enough to be able to show it's systemic, not individual crimes, but to be able to show that there is a deliberate, systemic, purposeful reason for doing these crimes?
I will give you an example. For instance, when we liberated Kharkiv region, and when we start to interact with families whose children were transferred to Russia, they were pressed by occupation authorities to sign something like a power of attorney with blank piece of the person who will be somehow, accompanying their children. And they even don't know where their children were transferred. So we have a lot of such cases, and we documented all of them. So this is only one example how they treat it. From the point of view of international humanitarian law, they should unconditionally return back all Ukrainian citizens, including children, to Ukraine. And they have a lot of instruments. There are international organizations, there are third countries, and via different UN institutions, we send this signal many times. If they even pretended to evacuate Ukrainian children, then just release them and return home. If you are not ready to do it directly to Ukraine, do it through other countries or with the help of international organizations. But they don't want to do it. Only with international pressure, they are doing it from time to time. But it's not enough.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Van den Ven. Now, Mr. Guinness, you have the floor for 2 minutes and a half, please.
Thank you, Chair. 2 follow-up comments for me initially. I strongly share the contention that the evidence you've provided and other evidence we've heard demonstrates that the Russian regime is committing genocide as part of their invasion of Ukraine. The House of Commons made that determination early on, and I think it's one worth reinforcing now, strengthened by the evidentiary record that you provided. The international legal definition of genocide makes very clear. The second comment I wanted to make is that I think the conclusion we should draw from your testimony is not only about the need to support organizations that are pursuing justice in these particular cases, but to redouble our commitment to supporting Ukrainian victory. There can be no justice without Ukrainian victory, and this testimony underlines the high stakes. We're not just talking about sort of the abstract question of territory or where a border is. We're talking about how when you have occupation, people are being stolen. The horrific atrocities that people have to live under if they are in Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine underline why, rightly, there is no desire to compromise on the core principles of territorial integrity. I had asked about sexual violence as well as torture during my initial question, so I wonder if you can follow up on the issue of torture, specifically treatment of detainees. In the context of child abduction, we've heard testimony that I think would amount to descriptions of torture of children that have been abducted, but I wonder if you could speak more broadly to the use of torture by the occupying forces.
Thank you, and sorry that I missed.
In 1 minute, please.
Yes, torture is, once again, is systemic, and we are investigating thousands cases of torture. Even in Kherson region, which we liberated, we have identified, with all of the evidences, at least 11 torture chambers, which were places of illegal detention where all possible ways of torture was used against Ukrainian civilians. Torture is mass practice which is used against our prisoners of war while they are under Russian control. And when they are released, they give us evidences of torture and ill treatment which is committed against them during their presence in Russia. So torture is a weapon of war used by Russia, which definitely is their part of their persecutorial policy. And once again, all these elements of genocidal intent, of course, give us a certainty that Russia is committing crime of genocide.
Thank you, Mr. Guinness. Mr. Brunet-Duceppe, vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. That's not a lot when we have such an exceptional witness as you are, sir. You have the highest level of knowledge in this file. If there's something that you weren't able to say that you would like to say to the committee because you didn't have a question that allowed you to say it, I would like to give you those 2 minutes. So if there's something that you want to add that you didn't have the opportunity to mention, you have the floor.
I think that this war of aggression has showed to all of the world that the system of international humanitarian law, of international law and order, need to be improved in order to prevent commission of such crimes in Ukraine, in Europe, in other parts of the world in 21st century. In order to make this, to make it possible, we need to combine our efforts to fill in the gaps in system of international humanitarian law. And one of these gaps is actually the mechanism of how to return illegally transferred, illegally kidnapped children and civilians. We also have evidences of at least 16,000 of civilians, grown-ups, who are illegally detained in Russia. And there is no enough mechanisms how to return them back home. International humanitarian law does not provide even the procedure of exchange of civilians. Sorry to use this a little bit cynical wording. But that's why I think that combining our efforts in order to create such mechanisms, to make United Nations mechanisms more efficient and more workable, we need to be united for this. We need to combine politicians and lawyers in sphere of international humanitarian law to create such mechanisms. Because once again, we will do our job as prosecutors, my team and team of Karim Khan and our colleagues in other countries. But it's not enough to ensure that all children will be returned back home. It's our obligation. I think it's our joint obligation to do it, to manage to create such mechanism and to execute this mechanism and to return our children back home.
Thank you,
This
Mr.
will
Costin.
prevent commission of such crimes in other places of the world.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Now I would like to invite Mr. Angus to take the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. We've been witnessing unprecedented levels of violence and trauma inflicted on the Ukrainian people, and also the incredible resilience and defiance of Ukraine. Canada is just a middle power, but we have a strong emotional link to Ukrainian people. What steps do you think Canada needs to take to ensure that we are there in the long term, whether it's on humanitarian, whether it's on reconstruction, or also ensuring that international law is utilized to the full extent so that the perpetrators of these crimes know that no matter how long it takes, they will not walk away free, that the international community will hold them to account? What role can Canada play in helping that?
In order to ensure that Ukrainian people will live in peace, we need to win this war. And winning this war means defeat to Russia. And this is not only for Ukrainians. Once again, this is in order to restore international law and order. You see that when aggressive war is ongoing, we are facing new hot spots on the map, on the global map. And we afraid that we all will see more if Ukraine will not defeat Russia as soon as possible. So all elements of support, starting from military support, financial support, humanitarian support, political support, support in our quest for justice and accountability, should be sustainable, because it's not only for Ukraine, it's for all of you. It cost a lot to reach our victory. We, Ukrainians, our brave soldiers and officers, are paying with their blood. Ukrainian civilians are paying with their blood. Many nations who help us paying their part of cost, but it's usually military and financial part. We believe that as soon as we get everything we need for the victory, it will cost all of you less if we will receive what we need as soon as possible than if we will receive it later, and it will cost you more. And every new conflict on the global map will cost all of us more. Helping us to win as soon as possible, please don't forget, we are also saving lives of our soldiers, of our civilians, and we are saving lives of those Ukrainians who are still under occupation and still are victims of Russian regime. So not only stand with us, win this war with us. We are committed to fight. Please help us to win this war as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Of course, sooner better than later, especially in a case like this. Merci pour votre témoignage et votre...
Thank you for your testimony and your participation on the study on the unlawful transfer of Ukrainian children to Russia. We're very grateful that you were able to take the time to meet us, to share your expertise on these topics that are so important. If you have additional information for the subcommittee, please contact the clerk.
Now suspend briefly this meeting so we can welcome the next panel of witnesses for the study of international disability inclusive education. Suspend for a few minutes. Thank you. this meeting to order. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. To facilitate the participation of visually impaired participants at today's session, I would ask all members and witnesses to identify themselves each time they begin speaking. Avant de prendre la parole, attendez.
Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you're participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. And please mute yourself when you're not speaking.
Interpretation for those on Zoom. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witness, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed their required connection tests in advance of the meeting. It is my pleasure to welcome the second panel of witnesses who have joined us this morning as we begin our study of international disability inclusive education. Education cannot wait. We have Ms. Yasmin Sharif, Executive Director, Maha Koshan, Program Specialist, Inclusive Education and Disability Inclusion. From a Global Campaign for Education, United States, we have Jennifer Riggs, Executive Director. From Inclusion International, we have Diane Richler, Co-Chair, Catalyst for Inclusive Education. Monica Karts, Co-Chair, Catalyst for Inclusive Education. From Special Olympics, Timothy Shriver, Chairman, Board of Direction. Gail Hamamoto, Chief Executive Officer for Special Olympic Canada. From United Nations Children's Fund, Robert Jenkins, Global Director, Education and Adolescent Development. We will begin with Ms. Yasmin Sharif. Vous aurez un maximum de 5 minutes.
You will have a maximum of 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we will go to questions with members of the subcommittee. I will indicate when you will have 1 minute left.
Ms. Sharif, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please. Ms. Sharif, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development, House of Commons, for having us here today, all colleagues and friends in the education sector. It's a very important consultation, and I'm glad to be here together with my colleague, Maha Koshan. And we can also respond to any questions. Maha will be the expert on any additional questions. First of all, I would like to thank Canada as a founding member of Education Cannot Wait. We often get questions, what is Education Cannot Wait? We are a global fund for education in emergencies of protracted crisis. We are situated in the United Nations. So we work across the UN system. We are hosted by UNICEF, but work with all UN agencies, and we work very closely with civil society organizations. And Jennifer Rigg, of course, represents the Global Coalition. And together with education ministers, private sector, and strategic donor governments. So Canada was one of the founders of Education Cannot Wait at the World Humanitarian Summit, and have also contributed generously At our high-level financing conference earlier this year in Geneva, Switzerland, Canada pledged an additional $87 million over 4 years in our strategic plan, 2023 to 2026, to Education Cannot Wait. The funding that we receive for the coming 4 years are targeting 20 million crisis-affected children, especially girls and adolescent girls that live in very hard-to-reach, fragile crisis, climate-induced disaster, refugee-affected countries. Canada has played an instrumental role in most of our interventions, but I will highlight also that additional contributions have been made to our investments in Bangladesh for the Rohingya refugees, to refugees and host communities, where we are reaching more than 350,000 children and adolescents. When it comes to disability and inclusion in education and emergencies, our approach is fully aligned with the Global Affairs Canada commitment to disability, inclusive education, aligned with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We also welcome the global leadership that Canada showed during G7 and Charleroi, and again, where the Charleroi Declaration states that girls with disability are the especially marginalized that require particular attention. What are we doing? First of all, let me mention before I go into Education Cannot Wait's works and results, the World Health Organization estimates that 16% of the world population are experiencing significant disability. And this is very interesting. Please remember this. 80% of them are in the global south. And many of them live exactly and precisely in emergencies and protracted crisis situations. Now, for Education Cannot Wait, as a global fund that looks for learning outcomes and quality, and also to make everyone work together, coordinated and jointly, rather than in silos, which we have enabled us to successfully reach 9 million children and adolescents in the hardest hit parts of the world with a quality education. We address both first emergency response as well as long-term development investment. We are committed to reach 10% of children with disabilities, and we have increased our budgetary allocation to at least 5% of every program to reach children with disabilities. We see the kind of work we do with local organizations in Iraq, in Colombia, just to mention a few. So far, we have reached over 100,000 children that then receive Braille typewriters, sign language, interpretation, long canes, and infrastructure that enable them to go to school. So there is action and there are results. I have 4 seconds left. I thank you once more. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Ms. Sharif. And now I would like to invite Mr. Jennifer Rigg to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you to all esteemed members of this subcommittee, distinguished witnesses, and everyone joining us today in person and online. My name is Jennifer Rigg, and I serve as the Executive Director at GCE US, a coalition of over 80 national and community-based organizations, international groups, teachers unions, student and youth groups, parent associations, organizations of persons with disabilities, academic institutions, faith-based groups, and advocates dedicated to ensuring quality, inclusive, universal education for all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and support this subcommittee's important study of international disability inclusive education, including intellectual and developmental disabilities. We are a broader part of the Global Campaign for Education, which is a network active in over 100 countries. And especially in Canada, we are so grateful to collaborate closely with the Canadian International Education Policy Working Group, sometimes known as CIPWIG. I join this conversation today as a person with lived as well as professional experience in disability inclusive education and human rights for all persons with disabilities of all kinds globally. I live with a visual disability and physical disabilities, for example, affecting my hands and wrists. I'm also the parent of children with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD, and aunt of students with autism. My mother worked at a Center for Independent Living when I was younger, advocating for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I grew up in an advocacy and human rights environment where my family helped fight for me to overcome challenges and stigma, and we continue doing so for others. Please consider how you, your family, friends, networks, and the global community are all affected by the full diversity of disabilities. Imagine you were born with a disability in a country such as Sudan without a birth certificate, therefore making it even more challenging to access school and support systems, without early learning supports, and with no access to inclusive education. We strongly believe that every learner can thrive in any education system with a twin track approach to education that promotes system-wide transformation to improve the quality of inclusive education for all, while also providing targeted support to learners with disabilities. You heard some of the statistics from Yasmin. We know that children and youth with disabilities are often marginalized and not given the chance to contribute within an inclusive school setting, or all the important economic and community aspects that can be unlocked after graduating from school. For example, at the primary level, completion rates for children with disabilities are 15 to 18 points below their peers, according to the Price of Exclusion, Disability in Education, and that's for the students that are lucky enough to make it into school. In addition to completion rates, changing the perception of children with disabilities in and out of schools is very important. Often the adults and people around children with disabilities might consider them unable to learn, even with accommodations and supports, and they may be kept out of school. Securing and advancing the rights of children and youth, importantly including persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities, is crucial to creating a brighter future for students of all identities. For example, school systems that support teachers and students with foundational learning, taught inclusively, create an environment where it is easier for all students to learn successfully. With IDA, IDDC, and GCE, we urge everyone to join the Disability Inclusive Education Call to Action to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education, which has already been endorsed by over 220 organizations and global leaders, including ECW, Inclusion International, Special Olympics, UNICEF, and organizations joining this wonderful session today. We highly recommend for your consideration for recommendations this call to action, and we've shared it in full. It is possible to achieve international disability inclusive education for all in our lifetimes. However, far more still needs to be done to realize the right to quality inclusive education for all. I am hopeful that this subcommittee and global leaders will advocate for international disability inclusive education, including intellectual and developmental disabilities. We would like to especially extend our gratitude to MP Mike Lake and to all of you for your global leadership, continued collaboration, and commitment to ensuring inclusive education for all students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Riggs. And now I would like to invite Madame Diane Richer from Inclusion International to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, distinguished witnesses, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the committee for undertaking a study of international disability inclusive education, including intellectual and developmental disabilities. Special thanks to the Honourable Mike Lake for introducing this critical issue to the parliamentary agenda. Also thanks to Ms. Vanden Belt, who was one of the few people at the UN-organized pre-summit for the Transforming Education Summit in Paris last year to raise the issue of inclusion within education. And I also want to express my thanks to my Member of Parliament, the Honourable Carolyn Bennett, who is one of the first members of this House to advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities. I'm pleased to be here today representing Inclusion International, the global federation of associations of persons with intellectual disabilities and their families, with over 200 national members in over 115 countries. I'm joined virtually by Monica Cortez from Bogota, Colombia, who with me co-chairs Inclusion International's Catalyst for Inclusive Education, which assists our members in promoting inclusive education. Monica, will you say a few words?
Thank you very much, Diane. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today and share our experience in Colombia. As member of Inclusion International, we have been promoting inclusive education for more than 15 years, providing tools to families, teachers, and decision makers so that they can have a shared vision of what inclusive education means for people with intellectual disabilities. We know the transformative power of inclusive education when our children can be recognized and valued by other students without disabilities and by the community in which they live and develop. Only then can they have real networks in the future to live in the community with sufficient social capital to make them part of it and provide them with the necessary support. The goal of inclusive education, as stated in SDG 4, led us to participate in an initiative funded by Education Cannot Wait to ensure education to students who live at risk of prolonged emergencies, such as migrant children, victims of armed conflict, and girls and women victims of gender-based violence, among whom are people with disabilities. We are learning that inclusive education is a gender issue. When children with disabilities are left out of education, their mothers cannot participate in the labor market, and in conflict and crisis education is often the only place where girls and women can be included. Colombia is committed to having a unique inclusive education system that recognizes the importance of giving a place to each student, following their individual difference and providing the necessary supports and adjustments. Countries that have ratified the CRPD and committed to closing gaps in access to inclusive education for students with disabilities must invest resources in cultural transformation, breaking down barriers that still exist for underrepresented groups such as students with intellectual disabilities and with high support needs who remain out of schools in a high proportion. Finally, from my experience as a mother with a son who has an intellectual disability and knowing other persons who are adults today, we see the favorable impact that inclusive education has on the life of persons with intellectual disabilities and their families. They can transition to training programs and employment and enjoy a full life in the community. Thank you very much. Diane, back to you.
Inclusion International has been pleased with the increased global support for inclusive education, such as in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was ratified by Canada in 2012, the commitment to inclusive education in the Sustainable Development Goals, and the conclusion of the UN Transforming Education Summit. However, despite these international commitments, Inclusion International has found that mainstream development projects fail to include people with intellectual disabilities, and in many cases promote segregation and other human rights violations. Data available through the OECD demonstrates that people with intellectual disabilities are excluded from nearly all projects funded through official development assistance. And I believe that the clerk has shared with you a link to a study that we did that shows the the very low investment through OECD members in education that includes learners with disabilities. And looking at the OECD and country investments, 42% of the education programming is not compatible with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Similarly, a review of investments by the Global Partnership for Education found that most investments in the education of learners with disabilities were for learners with physical or sensory disabilities, and most were for segregated programs. Many attempts to increase participation in education for learners with disabilities, or for girls, for refugees, for minorities, for LGBTQ+ children and youth, focus on barriers for specific groups. Inclusion International argues that what is needed
Madame
is
Richler, if you could wrap it up,
yes.
please.
What is needed is a transformation of education systems to provide higher quality education for all. One of our specific recommendations is that Global Affairs Canada do a systemic review, such as we've seen done in other countries, of all activities related to inclusive education internationally, both bilateral investments, activities by staff of Global Affairs Canada and in our various missions, as well as participation in multilateral institutions such as Education Cannot Wait, UNICEF, and the World Bank. I'd be happy to answer questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Litchler. And now I would like to invite Mr. Timothy Shriver to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have problem here?
An even humiliated population in the world. It's a strong statement. I believe it is very, very easy to back.
Sir, can you start from the top because we couldn't hear you in the beginning, please? So from the top, please. You don't lose any second.
Okay. I'm starting my timer again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to address this committee together with my fellow witnesses. I represent the Special Olympics International movement. I'm happy to be joined here by Gail Hamamoto, who represents our work in the great country of Canada. And like many of you on this call, I represent what I consider to be and what I think factually can be supported to be the most overlooked, excluded, and even humiliated population in the world. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities are in every country, every ethnicity, every geography, every community. And yet today, despite their presence in our families and in our communities all over the world, they're still more likely to be institutionalized, more likely not to go to school at all, more likely to die young from neglect and injustice in healthcare systems, less likely than any other group virtually to have a job, have friends, have a home, or have a full and complete life. Let me be very clear, Mr. Chairman. The problem is not the disability. The problem is not intellectual and developmental disability. The problem is fear, neglect, indifference, and oversight. The problem is us, and the problem is urgent, and the problem is now. Notwithstanding the very important comments that have been made, passage of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, passage and the adoption of the Millennial Development Goals and now the Sustainable Development Goals, notwithstanding the proclamations, the funding mechanisms that exist that are represented in part by many of us in this room and by people beyond this room. We have a crisis, an enduring, lasting, neglected crisis. This has not been addressed well by any of the institutions, including my own, around the world. I don't point the finger at anyone in this room. I point the finger at all of us for the state of the situation we have now, where the estimates are anywhere from 50 to 80% of children with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't go to school at all. And how can we sit here and pretend as though we're making progress? We are not making progress. We are not responding to the demands of these goals. We are not fulfilling the letter of the law that's been adopted by countries like Canada and hundreds of others, over 100 others around the world. We have fallen short on all these fronts. Fear remains in charge of the policymaking and funding mechanisms that are could be addressed to the needs of people with intellectual disability. So I don't mean to be sounding a discordant note, but I want to sound an urgent one. Business as usual is not getting the job done. It's resulting in persistent injustice, neglect, shorter lives, the impoverishment of women and families and children with intellectual disabilities. Our movement, the Special Olympics movement, we've been in this business one way or another for over 50 years. We have a fairly simple formula for addressing these challenges. We invite people to meet each other in a context of ability, not disability. We invite people to celebrate the gifts, the values of each and every person. We invite people to adopt an attitude of universal dignity. We call this formula an inclusive mindset. It has been very well traveled in Canada. Red Foster going back over 50 years, Tim Samuel more recently, a distinguished Canadian, and now you see Gail on the phone here. 41,000 athletes in the country of Canada who participate in these community-based activities. Every year, 17,000 volunteers. Here's my pitch. It is time for bold action. Young people are asking us for bold action all over the world. This is an area where we can respond. People who are more conservative ask us for a refreshing of our values, of our commitment to human decency and human personal responsibility. This is a chance for us to do just that. The SDGs want us to do it. The CRPD wants us to do it. Today, the Special Olympics movement is promoting social inclusion in over 28,000 schools around the world. 150 countries. We need to do more. We want to reach 150,000 schools, but we can't do it alone. We can't do it with nickels and dimes. We need significant investment from foreign development agencies, from multilateral organizations, from foundations. We stand here poised to work with you, to work with all the members of the committee, of course, the distinguished Member of Parliament Mike Lake and others who are leading these discussions, to supercharge these efforts so that we don't have this same conversation a year from now or 2 years or 5 years from now and report such disappointing numbers as I reported today. Our movement, our Unified Champion Schools work can help bridge the gap, teach children how to play together, they will learn together, and they will grow up and live together. Everybody wins. This is not just a program for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is a call to action for all children. No child has an adequate education who learns and grows excluding other children. This is in the interest of all of our children, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now I would like to invite from United Nations Children's Fund, Mr. Robert Jenkins, to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think my comments will build on my fellow witnesses. Just want to thank you yourself, Chairman, the committee members, my fellow witnesses, but also I want to thank Canadians. Being a Canadian myself and having served in the United Nations for 30 years, I've lived outside of Canada for a long time, but continually in various postings all over the world, I've come across Canadians working on inclusive education, very passionate about inclusive education. I think it's deep to a core of being Canadian. And I just want to, as evidenced also at the global stage through the Charles Lebois work, but also many different examples of the government, of senior decision makers, all the way down to community-based workers that are advancing this important agenda. But I fully agree with fellow witnesses that there's far more to be done. I think where I can add value, being from UNICEF, which is the largest education sort of wing of the United Nations, working in 140 countries now today on this issue. We have learned on what works, and let me just sort of build on the earlier comments by offering the committee some ideas. One is we recognize how important it is that inclusive education is transformed as part of the transformation of education systems. Education systems around the world need to currently be transformed. We all recognize the global learning crisis. Kids are not learning what they need to throughout the system, and children with disabilities are particularly marginalized. When reaching children with disabilities proactively, it needs to be embedded in that transformation process. So what does that look like? That looks like when you're at national level in a given country and you're planning for how to improve an education system with the government, all actors, including the Canadian government, Canadian NGOs, the UN system, with much support from Canada, we undertake a prioritization exercise and embed the very important issue of promoting inclusive education, bridging children with disabilities back into the school system at the heart of that transformation. And as Tim Shriver mentioned, the indicators are clear, and I think all the committee members will be aware of, children all around the world with disabilities are marginalized in education systems. So by bridging them back in and by undertaking systems change to enable that to happen, we can transform the system as a whole. All children benefit. That transformation also, there's been some amazing examples around the world with Canada's support and leadership and the UN and others in which that transformation has happened. It starts also with data, understanding where are those children in a given country, what barriers are they facing, how can those barriers be overcome. So we need to and engage with children and youth across the board in the transformation process, but including children with disabilities at the heart of that consultation and process. So we understand what needs to be done, and then we move forward collectively. Second, it's absolutely critical that capacity is built throughout an education system, starting from the ministry through to local authorities, principals, teachers, etc., in order to welcome all children back into schools, enable children to meet children where they are in their learning and their needs, and enable them to be successful in an inclusive way. It's critical also to address the social norms that Mr. Schreiber was also talking about, and others. We need to recognize that children with disabilities face barriers within schools, but also within homes, and the importance of, again, proactively bridging, and within communities, proactively and holding ourselves all accountable to bridging them back and enable them to realize their full potential. Bottom line is Canada is a global leader in education, has been for decades. I've witnessed it myself on the ground. I've witnessed it now in this global role I play. I'd encourage you to continue to lead in this area. Count on UNICEF's full support to translate this goodwill of Canadians into action on the ground to realize the right of every child to education, including children with disabilities. Much appreciated. Back to you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. And now I would like to thank all the witnesses for their comments, good comments we have heard. And now we pass to the period of question by the member of committees. And I would like to have the attention of the member of the committee. Please remember to identify yourselves each time you begin speaking. And please clearly state to whom your question is directed. I would like now for the first round to invite Mr. Mike Lake to take the floor for 5 minutes. The floor is yours, Mr. Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Mike Lake, as you mentioned. My question statement first is to Tim. I have a son who's a Special Olympics athlete. Very thankful for the program. Referencing, I pulled up your uncle's speech from 1962, where he talked about going to the moon. He said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our challenges and our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, one we intend to win." If you just replace the phrase "go to the moon" and include every child, it reads very well. We choose to include every child and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. You talked about, the fact that when we include kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities, everybody wins. I think that we can get to the place where every single child is included in education before the end of the decade. Every single child. To what extent, if we grasp this concept, if we grasp this idea of reaching the truly hardest to reach in the world through education, can we reach every child along the way and accomplish many of the other goals that we're trying to accomplish at a global level that desperately needs to come together right now?
So this is Tim Schreiber in response. Mr. Lake, thank you for a beautiful analogy, I suppose, the right way to put it. This is not easy. If it had been easy, it would have been done already. We wouldn't be here for having this hearing. We wouldn't be talking about neglected children, abused children, lonely children, institutionalized children, forgotten children. But the reality is we are, and it will take 20, 30, 40. I don't know how many scientists and engineers and scholars were required to put a human being on the moon in the 1960s. But my suspicion is just at NASA by itself, it was 50 or 60,000 people. I don't quote me on that. It's going to take the same thing here. We've got to wake up, Mr. Lake. and I know you know this, we've got to wake up to the enormity of the challenge and the responsibility that comes with proclaiming that we're going to try to meet it. I mean, it's an embarrassment. I frankly find myself embarrassed in meetings like this as a professional in this field. And I'm embarrassed by, as I said before, by my own organization. So, yeah, we're going to have to do it, and it's going to be hard. But, you know, this is going to take a significant shift. I hope Canada leads it. You know, I've knocked on doors, and maybe you can hear in my voice a certain frustration, which has been built up over the years. I am frustrated. I'm tired of hearing parents tell me there's nowhere for their kids to go. I'm tired of hearing parents tell me they have no friends for their child. I'm tired of it. You know, I thought when in my 20s and 30s we would solve these problems. We haven't even come close to putting the necessary effort behind it. Couldn't Canada, on the heels of this important hearing, make a commitment to investing some significant resources out of its global development and foreign assistance budgets for these children? You help every child in the world when you help our children. We help every school system in the world when we implement universal design. We help every teacher in the world when we educate them to be able to be an includer in the classroom. Pedagogies improve. Access to buildings improves. Instructional outcomes improve. Climate improves. Behavior problems go down. Mental health problems are reduced. It's not just, you know, our kids that we're fighting for here. It's all children. And we know this as educators. My background as an educator, we know that when we include every child wins. It's not just the child who is locked out, child in the segregated classroom, segregated school, or for that matter in the segregated institution. It's not just those children who benefit. Every child benefits. So we're robbing not just children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We're robbing all children of the chance to actually have the trust and faith and belief in themselves that they're going to grow up in a world where everybody has a chance, which is what they want. So it's going to be hard. Yeah, but Mr. Lake, I would very much trust in your judgment and in your zeal and in your leadership to marshal the kind of coalition and the kind of resource commitments that we need now. And not to continue the talk, but to implement a much more aggressive plan of action. Thank you.
Diane, any comments to that? I almost just want to tee you up to ask you if you want to. I will do that. I'll just tee you up. Go.
Thank you. This is Diane Richler, and I fully support everything that Tim Shriver said. I guess speaking from my personal experience, my first exposure to inclusive education was when my kids were in elementary school. And the first inclusive classes were starting in Toronto. And when I went to see those classes, they were the kind of classes that I wanted for my kids. They were active. Kids were working together. The teacher wasn't at the front of the room telling everybody to be quiet. They paid attention to the individual needs of all of the kids. 10 years later, my godson was diagnosed with autism. And he went through an inclusive education in British Columbia from preschool through to high school. And there's no question that having him in the school, having the teachers learn the kinds of things that Tim Shriver mentioned, improved the education not just for him, but for all of the students in the school. And what concerns me is that we've made progress, and I'll turn to Canada now with some progress, including the word disability in the Charlevoix Declaration and including it elsewhere, but it doesn't go down. It's just, there are platitudes, excuse me, but it's easy to say the word inclusion. But what this means is really looking at investments and stopping to look at what are the barriers for this kind of kid? What are the barriers for this kind of kid? What are the barriers for this kind of kid? What does a school have to look like? What are all the elements that have to be in an education system to make sure that nobody's left out? Because all too often, when there's a focus on one group of excluded kids, barriers are built up for others. And we've seen that for kids with intellectual disabilities. And that's a real concern with the way some of Canada's feminist international assistance policy has been implemented. Because too often there's been a lack of focus on the fact that children have multiple identities. Girls aren't just girls. There are Indigenous girls, and there are girls with disabilities, and there are LGBTQ girls. And we need to be building systems for everybody. And unfortunately, I don't think that we're building enough into the international programming that Canada is involved in to make sure that those issues are raised everywhere that Canada has a voice to talk about education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And now I would like to invite Madame Vandenberg to take the floor for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for what I think is going to be a vitally important study on something that isn't always given the front of mind. And I'm reminded about, I guess, 10 or 12 years ago, I was at the launch of the UN Women's about 650-page report on the state of the world's women. And somebody in the audience put up their hand and said, why in 650 pages is there no mention of disabilities? And the head of UN Women who was there to answer thought for a moment and then said, because nobody who was on the team that was researching and writing the report had disabilities. And I think this is the importance of being at the table, of having the voices there, because as we all know, this is something that people are not opposed to, and we've seen all of these conventions, but it is not front of mind if it doesn't have presence. So what my question is, and I'd like to pick up actually on the last question, Ms. Rickler, you talked about the idea of inclusion in terms of not having segregation. And often when you look at rights, it is seen that a right to education, but not necessarily in the same space, in the same room. And we see this, Ms. Sharif, you talked about refugee education, and we know many countries, it's very hard to have refugees integrated into national school systems. They're separate. And then, of course, with disabilities, there's a separation there again. And I was very, I remark on what Mr. Shriver said. The word you chose is that this is a humiliated population. That is a very, very powerful word, and I think that it is linked to this idea of separation and segregation. And then, of course, Mr. Jenkins, about transforming the entire system. I think that's what this is all about, is really transforming entire education systems and how we think about education. So my question is specifically about why is it important that children are included within one single education system and not given separate systems, and why is that important, not just for education but for the development of the child? So I'll go in the order that you spoke originally, and I'll just give the rest of the time for each of you to answer, and please leave enough time so everybody has a chance to respond to it in the same order that you did your introductory remarks. Thank you.
Yes, I believe Ms. Sharif would like to say something. Ms. Sharif, the floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very sorry. Yeah, sorry, Maha. I'll pass to you, but very quickly. I think it's great to be in this company, and I also would like to commend Mike Lake for bringing us all together, because I know how hard he works to put this as one of the top priorities. I want to just emphasize why it's so important. First of all, 80% of children and adolescents that are struggling with other abilities because they don't get the support they need through education are in the Global South. And because we are working with Canada as our major partner, one of our major partners for children in those conflict and crisis countries in the Global South, I'd really appeal to the committee to pay attention to the majority of the 80% who are, besides being marginalized and stigmatized because of their other abilities or disabilities, are in addition suffering from climate disaster, refuge, or armed conflict. If we cannot cater to this 80% in the most difficult circumstances on the globe, it will eventually impact all of us, not the least our conscience. And I also would like to thank Canada for commissioning a study to see how you can strengthen the system. But I again would appeal, bear in mind for all of us, many of my colleagues here, who are investing in those children who are left furthest behind, already stigmatized with absolutely nothing to cater to their disability needs. And that would require more financing for us to be able to do that work together with you as Canada. So I just wanted to make that point. But it's great to be with all of you because we all share the same passion and determination to bring them out there and not keeping them behind, but actually as the shining stars they are. And let me conclude by saying, I prefer to call them children with other disabilities. I was in South America recently, in Colombia, met a little girl who was born without limbs or arms. She had learned how to paint with her mouth. And I had never seen such beautiful paintings and such skills to do this by holding the pencil in her mouth. I think we need to lift them up at the stars who deserves to be put right at the forefront, but we need to invest in them financially. Thank you.
2 minutes, if I could ask each one just 30 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jennifer Rigg with GCE US. I will attempt to say a lot in just quick 30 seconds. Fantastic question. And the call to action that I referenced quickly has 3 key points that helps us get to the actually how to make these recommendations, right? First, making sure that we're setting medium to long-term targets to ensure all learners with disabilities are reached in all education programs, not in a segregated way, not with just one special school, but that really honors and reaches the full diversity of types of disabilities. And really, as Diane was saying, gets to the specific needs of each learner. And ensuring that all education programs and grants funding, increased funding, like Tim Shriver and others have emphasized is so vital, that they mainstream disability.
Can you wrap it up?
In disability inclusive criteria and targets. But thank you. The key is to move beyond pilots and get to full scale, making sure we fully support all children and youth in a way that will then also help all of society. Thanks.
Next, please.
Points and turn it over to Monica. First is inclusion is the law. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, General Comment 4, clearly spells out inclusion, not separate schools. And the second point, Tim Shriver made the point of how many children with disabilities are out of school. There isn't enough money to build separate schools and train separate staff. So if we think we're going to do this, we're going to have to do this together. Monica, do you want to add to that?
Quickly, please, time is up.
Yes. Yes, here in Colombia, we have a unique system where all the children can go without separate schools. But of course, as Jennifer said, we are working to include and to work for these groups, these minorities as students, migrants students, and students that are in the different minorities that are in emergencies and disasters. So it's necessary to show that the principles that have inclusive education are better for all, as Mr. Shriver said. If we have a unique school, we can show that all are benefit there, all the community are benefit, and it's necessary to do it because we need to have better education system for all and try to be better and work together to achieve a real inclusive education for all. It's necessary.
Thank you. For other members, please, but quickly because time is really up. Mr. Shriver, you want to add something quickly also, please?
I mean, it's been said, I think the time is for action. I know there's studies planned, but I just would point out politics here. Let's remember I know we're gathering in a political environment. There are people on this panel who identify as conservatives and liberals and centrists and progressives and all. This is not a political issue. And we have to be mindful of the fact that because it is not a political issue, it sometimes slips from the political agenda. So I would just remind us that I'll go back to Mr. Lake's comment. This is going to take a Herculean effort because no one's going to get advantage. But that's what our constituents want. They want to see people across the aisle working together. They want to see us cooperating around common values. So let's make this a political issue in the best sense of showing what politics can do when people work together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry, we exceed our time with a couple of minutes. Et maintenant, j'invite Monsieur Denis Trudel.
Now, I would like to ask Mr. Trudel to speak. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I think that it's a very important issue. I would like to concentrate on the aspect of services for Francophone children. In Canada, we know that it's a problem even to have access to education for Francophone children. I spoke with the representative of Francophone Affairs that says that in Saskatchewan, children have to travel 300 kilometers just to go to school, and these are not children who are living with handicaps, but access of services for Francophone children is already a problem in Canada. I would like to hear you speak about that. Mr. Jenkins, I would like to know if that's a problem throughout the world. Is it something that requires a particular approach for countries, for developing countries in Africa, for example? Is it more difficult for Francophone children to have access to inclusive education or to have access to specialized services than it is for children speaking other languages? We'll talk about the international aspects with you, Mr. Jenkins, please.
Well, thanks for the question. I can speak to the importance of younger children in particularly learning, or let me put it this way, that education systems, national education systems, offer younger children in particular instruction in their mother tongue. The evidence is very clear. Children learn better, more effectively in their mother tongue and can transition over time at later years. And that is something UNICEF engages with governments all over the world in and supports programming to enable children to learn in the language that is spoken at home. The second thing, just while I'm speaking back to inclusive education in terms of for children with disabilities, is when, as agreeing with Tim Shriver, it's not a political issue, but as a politician, when articulating the importance, I think there's two very simple arguments that I think have resonated in many countries. One is inclusive education systems are just more effective. They're more effective for reaching children with disabilities, enable them to realize they're right, but they're also more effective in learning outcomes for children already in school. And so let's just be clear, inclusive education systems are more effective, better education for all children. And secondly, from an efficiency economic return, there is a huge return on investment in enabling marginalized children, including children with disabilities, to realize their right to education. And that the return on that investment is very, very significant. So this just also makes sense from an efficiency and effectiveness point of view. As back to the original question from His Excellency, that includes also enabling children to learn in their mother tongue. It just makes sense.
Monsieur Trudel?
Oui.
Mr. Trudel. Yes, I wanted to go back to that, Mr. Jenkins. So children learn better in their mother tongue. That seems obvious, but when one cannot have access to those services, what do we do? Do we need increased funding in order to allow those services to be offered in the mother tongue of the children that one is serving?
So in where UNICEF works in the 135 program countries, as we're called, or low and middle income countries, we do invest in strengthening the capacity of teachers, of hiring local teachers from the area, from providing learning materials in a variety of languages, depending on the location, to enable such a for children to learn in their mother tongue and then transition over time. It is very challenging in some countries when you're dealing with 45, 50 languages, but indeed it's absolutely critical for us to continue to strive for younger children in particular to learn in their mother tongue around the world.
Monsieur Trudel?
Mr. Trudel? So I would like to ask a similar question of Ms. Richler. Did you observe this difference in Canada, a difference in the access to care or to services for children living in that situation in Francophone communities throughout the country? If you allow me, I will answer in English. Thank you.
I think that there's been a real shift in Canada in providing services for learners with disabilities and particularly intellectual disabilities in French. And I just want to point to New Brunswick as an example where they are recognized universally. They've been cited by UNESCO, by the OECD, by others as having one of the most progressive inclusive education systems in the world. There are Francophone, and that's true. They've got, two separate systems, the English system and the French system. They are both providing supports to learners with disabilities. And I think, just to follow up on what you said, Canada has, because of that, some of the best Francophone experts in inclusive education. We're not taking advantage of them. We're not letting them share their expertise, neither the experts from Quebec nor the experts from New Brunswick, with other Francophone countries around the world. And unfortunately, there are other French-speaking countries that are more active in that area, which are not as progressive in the area of inclusive education. So I see that as a real opening for Canada to play a special role in terms of promoting education for French-speaking children with disabilities based on our expertise in Canada.
Monsieur Trudel, 1 minute.
Oui, merci. Ben, en fait,
Yes, well, I would like to go on in that vein. So I'm happy to learn that in New Brunswick we have experts who are dealing with those issues. Is that found throughout the country? Do you still notice a difference in services in terms of access to care with children in this situation elsewhere in Canada, specifically for Francophone children?
I'm sorry, I can't cite specific examples, but I would be very happy to follow up and to provide information to the committee on what's happening in other communities in Saskatchewan, in Alberta, where there are inclusive systems.
j'apprécierais vraiment. Ça serait vraiment.
I would really appreciate that. It would be very kind. Thank you very much, Ms. Richler. Thank you, Mr. Trudel.
Ms. McPherson to take the floor for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony today. I particularly appreciate the comments that the work that we do in this committee, that the work that you're all doing to promote inclusive education is not just good for children that require that inclusiveness, that it is good for education systems, it is good for all children. I think that's really important. I also think that there is something to be said about it becomes such better education. You know, my son has ADHD. I have a private member's bill on ADHD that talks about making sure that teachers have the training, that the doctors have the training to identify and treat ADHD, because we know that if it is treated and if it is dealt with, that there are some real positives and that there is an extraordinary cost if it is not. So for me, I see that echoed around the world as we look at inclusive education. Now one of the things that I will disagree a little bit with our witnesses on is that this is not a political issue. I'm sorry to say, but it is a political issue, because what we are looking for here is increased funding. We're looking for increased funding to be able to do the work that Canada should be doing. At the moment, our official development assistance is set at 0.3% of GNI. That is insufficient. We have a political party in this country that ran the last election on a 25% cut to ODA. You know, these things cost money. We need to contribute to them. And it is money up front. It is money that we need to spend now so that we don't pay 1,000 times more later on at a later date. So from my perspective, I'm sorry, this is political. You know, I appreciate what we heard, that there is a systematic review that is needed. One of the things I'd like to ask, actually, Mr. Jenkins, is how do we ensure that our ODA is better spent? So knowing that we have limited dollars, knowing that we need to have a systematic review of where that is going, do we need to tie strings? Do we need to look at things like our multilateral organizations and demand data from them? We've heard today that there is insufficient data. Is this something that could be done to make sure that our ODA is being spent appropriate? I'll start with you, Mr. Jenkins, if I could.
Thanks very much for the questions. Great. There are some very clear metrics that we can use, which we can engage with on best practices of development actors, development assistants, to ensure they meet the minimum standards. Ideally, Canada would, of course, aspire to being greater than that, but the minimum standards on ensuring their assistance, Canada government's assistance overseas, is leveraged to the extent possible to promote inclusive education. And it's the points that you just raised, Ms. McPherson, and others, and we're happy to provide those. And again, you can, not only can it be related to Canadian assistance, but by adhering to those benchmarks and promoting those benchmarks across other development actors, we can move the needle significantly. So that's what I would encourage you to do. And we can, it links to data, it links to including throughout the transformation of education systems, can you maximize those interventions to ensure children with disabilities are included. I just want to flag one thing. If we don't do that, we also run the risk of doing harm, if you like, which is by providing assistance and enabling some children to learn and not others, you are running the risk of exacerbating disparities. So it is absolutely critical that when intervening, let's say particularly in humanitarian assistance, when you have large numbers of kids that require assistance in learning, we need to reach the most marginalized and work backwards. By doing so, that enables all children to benefit.
Mr. Chair, could I ask the same question to you, please?
Sorry, Ms. McPherson, I believe also Madam Sheriff, she would like to answer, please.
Certainly, Madam Sheriff, if you'd like to start, and then.
Very much. And I think the strategic donor partners such as Canada are critically important, because what is missing for us to do this work jointly is the funding. And a model where UNICEF is heavily invested, UNESCO, World Food Programme, and many civil society organizations, Jesuit Refugee Service, Canada Plan International, and Save the Children, is when you bring everyone to work together, you are more cost effective. And if you have a board that meets with this group of, or this pooled funding mechanism on a regular basis, you have direct insight into what we are doing 24/7. So it's a new way of working through global funds, where everyone gets their share of the development and ODA money that is invested, but you also have a direct oversight as a donor contributing country. And I speak on behalf of Education Cannot Wait. And we are very, very keen to make sure that UNICEF gets its lion's share, but just as much we do need civil society, and Jennifer Ricks can also testify to that. We all have to work together to be cost effective and more speedy and achieve sustainability and transparency.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson.
Again, there's no question that the cutbacks in ODA have had a very negative effect. And there's been a real narrowing of focus by the Government of Canada in terms of the issues that are being supported and the places that are being supported. So, you know, Monica and I are here representing an organization with members in over 100 countries, and they don't see Canada. So this is an area where, as I said before, we have leaders. We've got fantastic expertise to share, but we're not taking advantage of it. I guess the other thing to say in terms of the positive side of it, yes, being a political issue, is the Prime Minister is now a member of what's called the Group of Friends of the Sustainable Development Goals. But when we see Canada's interventions at international fora on the SDGs, we don't hear about education and we don't hear about disability. So there are plans being made now for what's going to follow up on the Sustainable Development Goals. And right now, education is not on the agenda. Even education is not on the agenda, and disability even less so. So one of the things that Canada could do right now, while these negotiations are going on in New York, is make sure that education is seen as a global priority for ODA, which it is not, and that persons with disabilities and their inclusion are seen not as a way of spending more money, but as a way of enriching what happens and making sure that the quality of education is better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. McPherson. And now we would like to go to the second round. And I would like to invite Ms. Damoff to take the floor for 5 minutes, please. The floor is.
Thank you. I want to focus my question on international education, particularly in countries where it's difficult for young people to get an education. So, you know, if you look at countries who are currently in a conflict, refugee camps, a country like Afghanistan where girls can't access education, let alone any of these young people who have either a physical or an intellectual disability. How do we reach those kids where accessing education is difficult to begin with, let alone living with a disability and being even below the bottom of the list? Maybe UNICEF and Global Campaign for Children or Education could comment on that one.
Chair, I'm just wait. Should I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Great. Thanks for the question. So I'll be brief. I really appreciate the emphasis on children living in humanitarian settings with conflicts. First of all, education needs to be seen as a life-saving intervention. It needs to be at the heart of humanitarian assistance. That continues to be a debate that we are losing. Currently, if you take global humanitarian resources, 3% are allocated to enabling kids to learn. And that's a problem. That needs to increase. And Yasmin Sharif from Education Cannot Wait and us and UNICEF and any others are championing the importance of enabling kids to learn. Having served in Jordan for 5 years as the head of UNICEF just before this posting, when you see a 7-year-old, 8-year-old flee conflict and you see them come across the border and they're 8, 9, 10, their first need is they want to continue to learn. They want to continue on a pathway. By enabling learning, it also enables us to provide psychosocial support, mental health, a whole wide range of assistance, which is also then proving critical. Now, when you have children they're facing multiple challenges to realize their right to education, which is particularly the case in humanitarian settings. Like I come back to, it is absolutely critical that the learning that we provide or enable children is inclusive of every child. By enabling all children to be reached, including children with disabilities, it also then breaks open the entire learning process, meeting children where they are on their learning journey, where they are in their physical journey, where they are with their psychosocial needs, etc. So the starting point is every child that is in a humanitarian setting needs to be able to learn. It's at the center of humanitarian assistance, and the international community with Canada's leadership will and the innovative approaches that we now have, technology enabled and others to realize this vision are right at our fingertips. It just now requires us to take this goodwill and translate it into action, and that includes resources.
Thank you. Ms. Damoff, please.
So I only have a couple of minutes left. Mr. Schreiber, I'm the very proud member of Parliament of Dr. Frank Hayden, and I also have Dr. Frank Hayden Secondary School in my riding. And most Canadians don't realize that he had done research on people living with intellectual disabilities and why they were excluded from sport, and came up with the idea in 1967 of the Canada Games and couldn't get the agencies that were looking after those living with a disability to participate. And then it was Eunice Kennedy Shriver who became aware of Dr. Frank's research, and it sparked Special Olympics. So I'm very proud of Dr. Hayden, and we don't recognize him nearly as much as Canadians as we should. I've only got a minute left, but I wondered if you could talk about the importance of sport for those living with an intellectual disability, because Special Olympics takes place around the world. So all you have to do is throw in a soccer ball. It doesn't have to be expensive. But how does sport tie into the ability to get those people into education?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and thank you for recognizing Dr. Hayden. I think I met him when I was 4. So I've known him for pretty much my whole life, and his track record is extraordinary. And I think that the short answer here is that developmentally, play and sport and games are a critical teaching tool. We teach social skills through sport and play. We teach cognitive skills, speech and language, relationship skills, emotional self-regulation. A lot of these things are not really taught scientifically through sport and play, but we know the teachers know how to do this. And we have found in our research, even with children, we have a program for children we call young athletes, where
He just has technical difficulties.
Yes, we will pause. You don't lose time. We wait to settle it down.
Mention that.
Is your connection is okay?
I think so, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Let me just close. Sorry, I got cut off. I think the main point we found through our research is that children can learn extraordinary amounts. There's a huge amount of cognitive and even neurological development that comes from a gross motor, fine motor, sport, recreation, training, and play. We see this throughout the life cycle, actually. As one doctor said to me, the greatest drug never discovered is exercise. As a learning tool and as a teaching tool, and particularly, if I could emphasize this, as a social inclusion tool. We're talking here about inclusion, but there is a lot of emphasis often in the inclusion space around physical proximity, putting children in the same room together. It's very important. I don't mean to underestimate it, but it does not achieve social inclusion. It doesn't create relationships. For that, you have to have both children with and without intellectual and developmental challenges learning how to interact. Sport is what does, we've found, and not because we're so proud of ourselves, but because we found it to be the most effective tool for strengthening the social cohesion that children experience in school, and therefore contributing to the development overall of stronger relationships, a stronger sense of self-regulation, stronger problem-solving and decision-making tools, and the like. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Shriver. Thank you, Ms. Duff. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Lake to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start by just responding to my NDP colleagues' political comments earlier by just pointing out that we are spending vastly more money than we've ever spent as a federal government and achieving the crisis level results in this area despite all of that spending. And that in the past, when we faced an economic crisis of this magnitude, the result down the road in the mid-90s to the early 2000s was a 32% cut in programming in funding for healthcare, social service, and education, and the lowest international development levels spending in our history at, I think, about 0.21% of ODA at the time because of the economic crisis a generation earlier. So we do care about the sustainability of whatever programs we put in place. Today, we're talking about a crisis. We're raising the alarm together. And I think as a parliament, despite our political differences, we have agreed that this is an area, we voted unanimously that this is an area that we need to take action on. And we've come together as a committee here because of that. I want to direct my questions this round to Jennifer Rigg. And I want to talk actually about outcomes and action. I want to ask about the call to action from the Transforming Education Summit on Disability Inclusive Education. Maybe could you highlight some of the numbers to kind of highlight what the situation is right now, that crisis situation? I believe it's 240 million children living with a disability around the world. And what are the outcomes like for those children right now?
Ms. Riggs, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Honorable MP Mike Lake. Absolutely, and that's right. The estimate is 240 million. However, your colleague previously, I think, asked about the data, and we're grateful for UNICEF, ECW, others on this call who are working night and day to improve it, but much more needs to be done, not just multilaterally, but in each of the programs and communities. So for example, how many times do we actually know how many kids with disabilities are being reached through a specific program and how many are not being reached? What are those barriers that are still leaving them out and leaving them behind? And then from a funding standpoint, how much funding within a particular program, education system, et cetera, is really making sure to go to disability inclusive education. we do know that what gets funded is indeed what gets prioritized and accomplished. So as a community, we've done research through the call to action to identify the need for at least, at a very minimum, 5% of funding to be going in this important area. But that twin track approach that we talked about earlier, it really indicates that it should be more. But as a starting point, and from an accountability standpoint, Canada and others have been an active part of the Global Disability Summit, as well as what you just wonderfully mentioned with the UN Transforming Education Summit. These are opportunities to self-report, and then we encourage everyone to increase and really make sure that all of our work is fully accountable. We have a relatively new disability marker in the OECD DAC system. Let's make sure that is indeed being used in conjunction with education, starting for kids right from birth onward. Thank you so much.
Mr. Lake.
The report is only 2 pages long, and then a whole bunch of logos, pictures of logos of supporters. So it's great to see so much support signing on to the report. It says that this is shocking to me, compared to children without disabilities, children with disabilities were 49% more likely to have never attended school, and 42% less likely to have foundational reading and numeracy skills. Mr. Jenkins, with the minute that I have left in my time this round, wondering what commitment UNICEF can make to taking action today in the short term to help resolve that problem.
What we can do is, Mike, as you and I have discussed, and thanks for your continued leadership of this, and thanks for continuing to engage so directly with UNICEF and advocating with us. Bottom line is we need to leverage our existing 144 offices. We spend about $1.6 billion or so in education a year. We need to leverage that to maximize its impact on inclusive education. And that comes back to our earlier discussions around ensuring that all of UNICEF programs are adhered to that standard and again, can kind of punch above our weight by crowding in others to work in a similar way. So we look forward to continue to work with you on that journey.
Thank you, Mr. Ling. Maintenant, j'invite M. Trudel à prendre la parole pour 5 minutes.
Now I'd like to ask Mr. Trudel to speak for 5 minutes. Ms. Sharif, I know that you are leading programs in many countries, Madagascar, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Central African Republic, and Democratic, the DRC. Have you seen differences for children who are living with handicaps who are francophone compared to the other children living in those countries?
She's not here.
Yeah, but Madame Cochon should take the place of Ms. Shalifa, please. Madame Cochon, the floor is yours, please, to answer. If you want the member to repeat the question, we don't cut your time.
Okay. Mrs. Speaker was asking about the experiences that we encountered in different countries. Is this right in terms of the Francophone and how it's taught in different countries? I think, if I gathered this correctly. Now, we know that in each country we go to, in each country we work, we find examples of successful inclusive practices. We do see those successful practices. We see some children getting education that have never been in educational environment before. But up until now, the examples that we have, they are scattered. They are examples of successes, but we really need to understand what would make these successful experiences successful first, and also what what would help us to build and capitalize on these successes. We strongly believe that inclusion is not only about bringing children to the environment, not only providing them with support in languages, while we really need to be looking at the holistic needs of the child. We need to be looking at what the individual child will need and tailor the support based on their individual needs. There was talk about the majority of the support going to those with visible disability. But when we know that only 5% of children with disabilities in emergency and protracted crisis receive education, we can speculate that even those with visible disability are not all included in education. So the way forward for us is to be thinking of the systematic barriers because discrimination still happen, stigma is widespread, and we need to be thinking about the systematic change that we need to bring to the educational environment so they can become welcoming environments for all, regardless of differences, type of difficulties, severity, or the differences that may exist among children. Yeah, thanks.
Merci, oui. Bon, là, j'aimerais y aller peut-être.
Thank you very much. Now, this is a question for everyone. Maybe Mr. Jenkins first on the situation of handicapped children in countries that are at war. Let's speak about Ukraine or Afghanistan, where it was very difficult. We could even speak about Gaza. I know that that situation is extremely difficult for children. Do we know anything about access to education for children living with a handicap, be it intellectual or other? I imagine that already in Gaza, access is complicated. If you have any data, or Mr. Jenkins or anyone else, to tell us about those specific situations, I would like to know.
Mr. Jenkins. Every situation, so UNICEF allocates about 60% of its education resources to children living in humanitarian settings, in a humanitarian context. That's come up in the 4 years I've been in this job, mainly because there's increasing humanitarian situations, unfortunately. So we're now at about 60% of our global education resources. The answer to your question is it depends on each context, but the reality is challenges that children face compound or become exponential. So if I'm living in a poor area, then I'm in a flood affected, and then I get affected by a flood. And if I'm disabled and I'm a girl of adolescent age and I live in a poor household, those challenges exponentially interplay. So it goes from, it's not only challenging, it's not 50% of children, then it goes to 10%, 1% chance those children can attend school or continue their learning. So bottom line being, children with disabilities living in humanitarian crises are exponentially disadvantaged because they've got not only living in a crisis as a challenge, but they're disabled. And unfortunately, we continue, despite our best efforts as a humanitarian community, we continue to fail those children in the vast majority. We collectively fail those children in the vast majority of contexts, which comes back to my recommendation strongly, which is when responding to a crisis, start with the children most affected, the most marginalized, working backwards. That will benefit all children.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Merci, Monsieur Trudel. And
thank you, Mr. Trudel.
Person to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the testimony. I think, Mr. Jenkins, I'm going to ask this one of you just because you were just answering my colleague with regards to sort of that intersectionality of impacts and how they compound. Working from those that are most impacted up, I mean, I agree with Mr. Trudel. We are seeing a situation in the world right now where the conflicts in Gaza are disproportionately hurting children. You know, we know the population in Palestine is over 50% children. Afghanistan has that particular complexity of the impacts on women and girls, and I can only imagine the impacts on women and girls who are trying to access inclusive education. In Ukraine, in a situation where we are also looking at conflict, I wanted to just give you another moment to talk a little bit about that compoundedness of the impacts, and perhaps layer on that how we have not recovered from some of those impacts that were found from the COVID, what happened with COVID over the last several years. If you could just talk about that a little bit for me, Mr. Shriver. Sorry, Mr. Jenkins.
I thought I was off the hook for a second. No, I actually appreciate the question. Thanks so much. I really do appreciate the committee's interest in reaching the most marginalized. Your commitment to reaching children with disabilities and also recognizing children with disabilities in humanitarian settings are particularly marginalized. So I just greatly appreciate it. It's refreshing because often children living in humanitarian settings, conflicts, etc., their learning needs is lower in the priority, as I've mentioned. So I think it's a great role for Canada to play, and I just really appreciate the interest. So just as a bit of a scary statistic, for 10-year-olds globally, 10-year-olds living in low and middle income countries, 70% of those 10-year-olds cannot read. 70% of 10-year-olds in low and middle income countries cannot read, many of which have been in school for years. So we have a global learning crisis, full stop. Then disabled children are particularly marginalized, as we've recognized, and we come back to all the points that have been made by all the committee members here and in the discussion about the importance of inclusive systems, better for all children and more efficient, more effective. Then we come to fragile context or humanitarian context, the ones you've mentioned, Ukraine, currently in Gaza, Afghanistan, etc. And indeed, you'll see basically education paused or children dropping out of the system and never coming back, which is what we're seeing in Afghanistan now. It is incredibly expensive to enable children to catch up and return back. Same in Canada, dropout program, etc. But so it's absolutely critical that we all do our best to continue to enable children to learn despite the challenging situation they're in. We saw that in COVID, as you've mentioned, with school closures. Obviously, the longer the school closed, the greater the impact it had on all children, but particularly on marginalized children around the world. The disparities increased dramatically during that very, very challenging global time. And that's the case now in a crisis hits. Many of the countries I've worked in, it was often in humanitarian settings, it's the marginalized children that are disproportionately affected by crisis. So disparities increase significantly, making it very, very challenging to bridge those kids back who are already facing barriers, bridging them back into school and continue on their learning journey. And that's absolutely a key message of the children with disabilities.
Ms. McPherson?
Thank you. And I guess one of the things I have a further question to that is, how do we balance that need to provide fast response in humanitarian crises? Some of these things happen very, very quickly. We want to get support to the places that it's needed. How do we balance that with the long-term development contributions that make the likelihood of conflict, make the likelihood of adverse, humanitarian issues less likely? Like, how do we balance the development versus the humanitarian when we're looking at inclusion for children? Because we know, as you say, speed is the issue here. Again, I'll ask that to Mr. Jenkins.
Sorry, I was a bit presumptuous saying that you were. I think that it's not a balance. Actually, it's a win-win. It's how we intervene. So when kids are coming across into Jordan from Syria, when I was responding as the head of UNICEF there, the way we intervene and enable children to continue their learning can be inclusive, and that's a win for all children. It can be done in a way also that improves the quality of education for all children. Something we were doing, we do in many humanitarian settings. So let's say when refugee children come to a school, when inclusive children come to a school, by supporting the school as a whole, improving all infrastructure, improve the teaching practices of all teachers, it's an overall inclusive environment. everyone wins. So it's by leveraging that humanitarian assistance to be transformative. And let's just even think straight in the classroom. If a teacher is able to reach children with disabilities, they're able to reach children of all abilities and of all learning better. So it's just an easy example of how you can leverage the short-term humanitarian systems in ways that transform the education system for all.
Ms. McPherson?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
We'll go to the third round, and we'll go for 3 minutes each. We start with Mr. Vandenberg, please. With Ms. Damoff, please.
I wondered, Mr. Jenkins, one of the things that I have seen is where the child themselves don't have a disability, but the parent does. And so a child is being thrust at a very young age into caring for a parent who's living with a disability, whether it's, for example, it could be a landmine that has resulted in mom is a single caregiver looking for a family, and all of a sudden the children are no longer able to go to school. How can we ensure we want all kids in school, and these aren't ones that are living with a disability themselves, but they are impacted by disability in the household. And it would probably be, certain countries it would be more prevalent than others, but I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on reaching those kids.
So we talk about reaching the whole child, and it's not easy. I work in the education system. I'm passionate about the education sector. I'm all learning. But I increasingly am recognizing that we can only get so far if we're just looking at the school, and a child has to bridge themselves into the classroom. We need to look at the whole child, where the child lives, the overall support needs of the child and their family, and provide comprehensive support in order for this to be effective. That includes social protection systems more broadly. But I also, maybe just while I'm speaking about this kind of approach to the whole needs, it also links to engagement. I think it's absolutely critical that communities are bridged into the school system, and there's a partnership between families, parents, teachers, and schools. We see that all over the world, and that will help to address this very important question that you're raising on particularly disadvantaged, marginalized families. If the school is seen as a center of the community as a whole, in partnership with all parents, it in itself is inclusive, then children will also be encouraged. The education will be inclusive.
To Anita for the rest of my time. You've got a minute.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to pick up on the issue of data collection, because I can't remember which witness, I think it might have been you, Mr. Shriver, said that 50 to 80% of these children are not in school. But that's a big, broad number, 50 to 80%. It's not very specific. And is that indicative of the fact that we really aren't systemically collecting this kind of data and information across the board, and what can we do better? So I'll turn that to Mr. Shriver.
Mr. Shriver,
that was me, and thank you for the question. It's Tim Shriver responding. Look, the data collection is very poor. It's better than it was 10 years ago. We know more. National programs are collecting more data. We're starting to see some data on disability and these kinds of things. But these are broad estimates. I have a default towards action. I think we could spend another 5 or 10 years improving the data systems. And we should have some effort to improve the data systems, because how are we going to know if we're successful or not? But I think we all agree here. We have, whether we measure or not, we have plenty of work to do. And I want to accept the friendly amendment from Ms. McPherson about this being political. I accept the idea and welcome the idea that this could become a source of political debate and contention, not because it creates tension or division or winners and losers, but because it creates urgency and importance. That's my thing. Mr. Lake asked, what can we do? Right? What we need in most of these countries right now is trained teachers. We need a massive investment starting today. This is when I go knocking on the doors of education ministers, which I've done through our coalition, which we're forming, a Special Olympics coalition for inclusive education, asking governments to put up money for inclusion, train the teachers, empower young people, empower families, allow for both sports and academic work to be done in schools, and commit to goals. I mean, we can do this. I'd be happy to support the development of a medium-range plan on data collection and data improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Shriver. Thank you. Sorry, time is up.
Not be distracted from action.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite Mr. Lake to take the floor for 3 minutes, please.
Well, 3 minutes will be tough. I just want to start by thanking everybody for coming, all of the witnesses for coming, and you're all friends, and I look forward to the follow-up conversations from here. I'm going to focus this question to Yasmin, specifically, who is probably taking a deep breath right now, wondering where I'm going to go. But to the point of action, just curious, what kind of commitment ECW would make right now at this point in time, November 21st, 2023, what kind of commitment to action specifically on disability inclusive education that Education Cannot Wait could make right now or would be prepared to make right now?
Ms. Caution, can you take the question, please?
Oh, she did.
Yeah, of course. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Lake, for your question. I think Education Cannot Wait has already made a strong commitment by targeting 10% children with disabilities across the different funding windows that we have. We already committed through signing the call to action, task call to action on disability inclusion, to ensure that our investments mainstream disability inclusion and ensure that every single funding or investments we have also include targeted interventions to the inclusion of persons with disabilities. I can say that it's important to keep to our commitment and to encourage also others to commit to reaching persons with disabilities, mainly governments in countries where we work. I think if we don't look at governments and invite them and encourage them to sign the task call to action, we will not really move the needle on disability inclusion. It's really important for us to also work hand in hand with governments, local organizations, other United Nations agencies, but also to ensure that there's sustainable efforts to mainstream disability inclusion so they remain for the long term. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to Robert on that same question. So I believe in rapid incrementalism. I believe in the idea that we can take small steps quickly and create large action. Robert, what small steps in the next sort of week or month might we take, or governments take, might you suggest, in terms of creating some momentum towards meaningful action on this issue?
I give you 1 minute to answer, please. That's extra.
3 things, I think, and as we're planning for 2024 around the world, all country offices right now are in UNICEF. We have this conversation. What can you do immediately in this country? There's an input part of this, meaning what different inputs can be provided, training of teachers, providing specific materials and digital accessible textbooks, etc. I think there's a process part to this, Mike. Are disabled children involved in the conversation? Are they participating? Are organizations working on this issue at the table? They need to be. So there's a process part that we can do right away, and then there's ultimately results. Are you measuring results for disabled children? How do those compare to other children? Are we doing all we can to make sure that children with disabilities have the same chance of realizing their right to education as others? So I think at all 3 levels, inputs, process, and ultimately results we can work on right away.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Maintenant, j'invite M. Trudel à prendre la parole pour 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Trudel, you have 3 minutes. Well, it's such a broad topic. I would like to say, Ms. Richard, that in my riding we have a resource for adults with intellectual handicaps or autism. 9 apartments in this building. The adults are independent. They can have common meals. I've invited them to Parliament here to listen to question period, and they work in a place that does different cooks, and they create meals for underprivileged areas. So it's not education, but it is a question of inclusion. And there's a huge waiting list for adults for that kind of resource. There's a huge lack of these, and it's a major challenge. So I wanted to talk about funding for this type of resource. How can we in our society work better towards inclusion? The adults who are involved there are wonderful, and they're in a way spoiled compared to other people in their situation. So what can we do as a country so that there's the least exclusion possible, that people are integrated and feel that they're a part of society?
A couple of things. First of all, in Canada, the new disability benefit is going to make a difference for families. I think that's something very important. And Rob Jenkins made reference earlier to work that UNICEF is doing around social protection. I think that, in the same way that human rights are indivisible, the rights of people with disabilities are indivisible. And so I think it's really critical to be looking at the investments in social protection, which right now in most countries don't take account to the extra costs of disability. So whether it's, issues that were raised by Ms. Damoff in terms of children having to help care for parents, whether it's the need for prosthetic devices that aren't covered, whether it's the need for special materials, there are extra costs, and some of the work that UNICEF is doing will help. I'm going to take advantage of the floor for just 1 second to mention something related to an earlier question of yours, and that's that in Francophone countries, many of the people, and this is maybe a delicate question to say because I know this is, or a delicate thing to say because I know this is on the record, many of the Francophone resource people come from countries that have a much more rigid approach to education. Canada does not. The approach to inclusion in Quebec, in New Brunswick, elsewhere in Canada, has a lot to offer internationally. And one of the problems that we've seen as Inclusion International is that when the resource people, Francophone resource people, are coming from countries that have a very rigid program where kids are streamed at a very early age and are separated, kids with disabilities are separated from their peers who don't have a disability, that sets the pattern. That's how the people in those countries are trained. Again, Canada can change that if we play a role. Right now, we're not there, and so other people are taking the lead, and we're not influencing Francophone countries.
Merci, Madame Richler. Merci, Madame McPherson. Et maintenant...
Thank you, Ms. Richler. Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Thank you for your evidence, your participation in our study of international disability inclusive education.
I invite you with honor to take the floor for 3 minutes, please.
And I don't even speak French very well, so it's a tricky thing. We don't have very much in common. I have a very quick question for you on some of the testimony. Sorry, Heather McPherson, some of the testimony that you provided earlier, Ms. Richler. You talked about the SDGs, and we know that they are universal. We know that Canada has signed on to them. As you mentioned, the Prime Minister has taken an extra interest in that. Do you know, in the last any of the two voluntary national reviews that Canada has undertaken, has education, inclusion, or even people living with disabilities been mentioned in those voluntary national reviews?
Related to that is the Transforming Education Summit that was held last year. Mm-hmm. And Canada did not place emphasis on that. It's not something that's been paid attention to. So a lot of attention to gender. And unfortunately, despite the words of the Charlevoix Declaration, mentioning the word inclusion hasn't translated into looking at those individual specific situations. So no, we have a long way to go. And unfortunately, even in the review of the SDGs or the monitoring of the SDGs that's being done by UNESCO, there are no indicators that are being that are the common indicators that are being used to look at evaluating the SDG 4 that focus on education. So
Okay.
even though there are indicators overall in the SDG, in
Yeah.
SDG 4 that deal with disability, when it comes to the ones that countries are paying attention to, there are 15 of them, they don't deal with disability.
Well, and because they are, sorry, Heather McPherson and Mr. Richler, because they are universal, we are not meeting those targets in Canada either. Like that's also something I think is key. This is not just a global issue. This is something that is supposed to.
It is a domestic issue.
And one would think too that the universality meant that even if it isn't the indicator within target 4, within goal 4, that those should there should be other indicators included throughout the other 16 goals as well.
They are not.
They are not. Thank you. So that might be, for example, a good recommendation for this committee.
That would be an excellent recommendation.
Excellent. And then the only thing I wanted to just get a little bit more insight on, and perhaps I would start with Ms. Riggs on this. Ms. Riggs, we talked about the making sure that our ODA is spent effectively and is spent properly and sufficiently, I suppose we could say. Could you talk a little bit about the need for collecting data and the need for tying strings to that development to ensure that it does have that inclusive component?
Yeah, thank you so much. In terms of tying strings, I would love to discuss this further, right? I think it would be great to, as the subcommittee considers their recommendations, for example, I look at what has worked on other types of inclusion that are really critical. We still have a ways to go on gender, for example, but we have found that bilateral and multilateral institutions have found it critical to ensure that gender transformative and disability inclusive education is embedded within those structures, right? So MAHA is an amazing example of an expert within ECW on disability inclusive education. Yet we also need to make sure that there are those types of people with those resources with every education cluster that's responding on the humanitarian front and across that full continuum that you and Mr. Jenkins discussed, right? Of humanitarian through to development in a holistic way to really reach children. So yes, like Mr. Shriver and others mentioned, data must be improved while we are acting and accelerating action. It's not something that we should wait for. We should not let perfect be the enemy of the good, so to speak. And like Ms. Rickler just said, it's so absolutely critical that the current SDG process and whatever may come next, which is indeed being negotiated by member state governments right now, that there be a very strong voice by member state governments as the governments of Canada and Namibia are co-leading that process for the Pact of the Future, to make sure disability inclusive education is front and center, and that children and youth with disabilities are not just there once for one consultation, but really there fully with policymakers throughout the whole process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. McPherson, and sorry for not recognizing. I thought there was a mixing. So merci pour vos témoignages et votre participation par l'apport.
Thank you for your testimony and your participation in our study of international disability inclusive education. We're grateful that you've taken the time to meet us and to share your expertise on this subject. If you have any additional information for the subcommittee, please contact the clerk.
I would like to thank all of you, all the witnesses, for their participation, giving their time to be with us and to explain and to give their point of view regarding this important issue that we are studying. It's the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting. So thank you. Meeting is adjourned. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.